Hey, ladies, thanks for being here. It is Thursday, um, my weekly live food and fitness session where we talk about various topics related to food and fitness as it relates to women in midlife, as all of us are in this group. So if you are here, if you're watching, please comment below and say hello. And also feel free to post any questions because I usually can see them. If you're watching the replay, please post that you're watching the replay and also any comments or questions that you have as well. So if you're new to the group, I try to go live every Thursday at 3 o'clock. And I think I've done just about every Thursday. Well, I've missed a couple for almost a year and a half now. So if you are new and you want to see some of the past live food and fitness sessions, just look at the top underneath the welcome banner up above under guides. And then I think it's guides 4 and 5. For some reason, I have them in 2 guides, but you can click on that and scroll through and see some of the past food and fitness sessions. So again, if you're here, please say hello in the chat and let me know if you have any questions. So today's topic is macro cycling. I got this question from one of you ladies a couple weeks ago. And so I'm excited to answer that question, or at least share my perspective. I'm not I don't have all the answers, of course, but I have been working in the field of nutrition for 30 years now. And so I have some perspective. I have some personal and professional experience. And so that when I present topics, I'm presenting my perspective and also what I have gleaned from clients that I have worked with. I've worked with probably it's probably been in the hundreds now of people over the years. So anyway, so today's topic is macrocycling. I did prepare just a few slides. Okay, so I hope you can see those. So what the heck is macrocycling? Okay, well, basically, it is a diet where you eat varying amounts of carbohydrate and fat over alternating 2-week periods. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. It is based on ratios to determine the appropriate amount of each macronutrient to consume in a given week. And the protein is held constant, but the fat and the carbohydrate is what varies every 2 weeks. So one thing can you all see it? I hope you can see the slides. For some reason, I'm not. Oh, comments. Let me see comments really quick. It's been a while. Hi, Barb. Good to see you, Barb. Can you see my slides? Can you let me know if you can see them? If somebody could let me know. So anyway, macrocycling, and let me just first explain what macronutrients are. I know there's a lot of talk about macro counting. Oh, you can't see the slides? Oh, pooey. Let's see. Oh, why not? Hold on a sec, folks. Hold on. Why? Let me try one more thing. I can see them on my side. I guess that doesn't help you guys. You still can't. Can you see my slides? Hooey. Well, I guess I'll have to. Oh, shoot. Oh, okay, good. Yay. So anyway, macronutrients are large nutrients, large in the sense that that we measure them in grams. And there are 3 macronutrients: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. I'm sure you've heard of that. Macronutrients are also substances that provide calories. So carbohydrate and protein provide 4 calories per gram, and fat provides 9 calories per gram. The micronutrients then are the nutrients we need in very small amounts. Like, for instance, vitamin C is measured in milligrams, and some other vitamins and minerals that we need are measured in micrograms, so tiny, tiny amounts, whereas macronutrients we need in grams. So I wouldn't get hung up on that. But anyway, carbohydrate, protein, and fat are the three macronutrients that we're talking about. They are the only macronutrients. So macrocycling is when people follow a specific diet where the amounts of the carbohydrate and fat vary over alternating 2-week periods, but the protein stays the same. So before I explain a little bit further, I want to just mention that macrocycling kind of grew out of another diet called carb cycling, which is one that I'm more familiar with because I am a triathlete, and endurance athletes do, not all of us do, but I kind of cycle my carbohydrate intake based on my training schedule. So for instance, and this is what I tell the athletes that I work with as well, if you have a long run or ride on a Saturday, you want to have your glycogen stores, which are stored carbohydrate, you want to have those pretty full. So the couple days before a long run or ride, you should eat more carbohydrates. I'll turn my phone off here. So that's kind of a loose definition of carbohydrate cycling. And then on your off days or days where you're not doing much exercise, then you eat on the low end of the carbohydrate range that's recommended for you. So that's basically what carb cycling is. And then I guess now the trend is macro cycling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And as I am talking, please feel free to ask questions in the comments. I can see them now, or comment. You know, if you're doing this, following this way of eating, now I'd love to hear about it. All right, so I mentioned, let me go back. I mentioned that in macrocycling, ratios are used. So basically it's percentages. What they do is people figure the percentage of calories that they want coming from each macronutrient. And so what the proponents of macrocycling suggest is that you first find out how many calories that your body needs, and then you calculate how much carbohydrate and protein and fat you need based on this starting ratio here you can see in the slide. The starting ratio that they recommend is 40% protein, 30% carbohydrate, and 30% fat. So that's the typical starting macrocycling plan, okay? So what they tell you to do is first find out how many calories your body needs, and there's a bazillion apps out there and calculators that you can do that. And so you get the calories. So let's use in this example, let's take a woman who's 55 and she's 68 kilograms. That's 150 pounds. Okay. So if she's going to follow this macrocycling plan, and let's say she's on a 1,500 calorie diet because she wants to lose weight, which is very typical. So if you take 40% of 2,000, okay, that is, I did all this, I can't remember right offhand, but you take 40% of, hold on a second, let's see, it's 40%, 0.4 times 1,500 is 600. So that's 600 calories from protein divided by 4, gives you 150 grams of protein per day. I'm going to come back to that point right there, because 150 grams of protein is a whole lot of protein. It's way more than most women eat. So let's kind of tuck that back in your mind. We'll come back to that. So you follow the same process with carbohydrate and fat. So for carbohydrate, it's 0.3 times 1,500 is 450, and that's carbohydrates. So divide by 4. That's about 113 grams of carbohydrate per day. And then you do the same thing with fat, and my little screen is in the way there. I think it's 50 grams of fat. Anyway, so that's what, a typical woman could follow. Um, and then if she were on a 2,000 calorie diet, which is really more of a normal intake for most women, you can see that that would be 200 grams of protein a day with 150 grams of carbs and 66 grams of fat. Okay, so basically what people do then when they're doing macro cycling is they follow that for a couple of weeks, and then they switch the carbohydrate and fat around where they consume a higher amount of carbs and a lower amount of fat. So for 2 weeks, they're basically on a high protein, high carb, low fat diet. And then for another 2 weeks, they're on a high protein, high fat, low carb diet. And they just switch back and forth every 2 weeks. Okay. If any of this is not clear, please feel free to ask questions. And I don't expect you to really understand the math. I just kind of I did want to show you these numbers because we're going to come back to that. Okay. So I don't see any questions. So let me go back before we move on. So I hope you kind of understand what macro cycling is. It is a method for weight loss. That's what most people use it for. I did read an article written by a well-known trainer, bodybuilding. Actually, I don't think he's a bodybuilder, but he's a trainer. He just raved about it. And he says, oh, you get so much more variety this way than with carb cycling because you can have high fat foods on 1 week and low fat foods or high carb foods on in the next 2 weeks. And it's just, so much more flexible. But I guess I'm going to share my opinion now, and I'm going to show you why I think this way. If you like the concept of counting macronutrients, go for it. This is definitely the plan for you because you would need to be counting your macronutrients pretty much all the time. Okay. And that is what a lot of people do when they want to lose weight or they want to, usually it's weight loss, or maybe there may be some other reasons for counting macronutrients, but you have to record everything you eat and it has to be pretty accurate. A lot of people use MyFitnessPal. In my Women in Motion program, I use a program called Healthy, and I do ask the women in the program to log their food so that I can look at their protein intake and just get a good idea of kind of what they're eating. So I do think macronutrient counting is actually helpful if it's done for a short period of time for educational purposes. A lot of people have no clue how many carbohydrates they're eating or how much, and that's important for people who have prediabetes, or more importantly, in my mind, how much protein they're eating. And so the only way to really know is to log it and to count the macronutrients. So I actually do think it's a good idea to count macronutrients for a very short period of time, maybe 2 weeks. And then usually you have a pretty good idea. But this type of diet means that you have to count your macronutrients all the time. And if that's something that you like doing, more power to you. I personally don't like to count macronutrients all the time. To me, I feel like I'm on a diet. It feels restrictive. And whenever you're relying on an external rule that dictates what you eat, then it's harder to pay attention to hunger and fullness and satisfaction and to actually enjoy the food because you're thinking, okay, so how many grams is in this? How much carb is in this? How much fat is in this? And then how much protein is in that? And it can get really tedious. So from that standpoint, I'm not a big fan of macro cycling. Okay. But more importantly, and I'm going to show you a couple other slides and hopefully back up what I'm saying is if you look at this starting ratio, 40% of your calories coming from protein is way too high. And even though I'm a big believer in protein, and I do find most women don't eat enough, 40% is way too high. If look at that 2,000 calorie diet, that's 200 grams of protein a day. I think the women in my Women in Motion program will quickly tell you there's no way they're going to get that much protein. You would be eating a lot of meat or a lot of Greek yogurt, uh, a lot of beans, a lot of protein shakes. And really, do you want to eat that way? Okay. And I don't think it's necessary. So I am not a fan of macrocycling because of how it ties you to a calculator all the time, but also because the protein is way too high and the carbohydrate is too low. Okay. Let me give you an example. And let me explain something else. So in my field of sports nutrition, there's what's called best practices. And what I have learned is the better way to determine macronutrient needs or even calorie needs is by using a formula that's basically grams of carbohydrate or grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. I don't expect any of my clients or my Women in Motion women to know this. I tell them this is how I calculate their protein needs, but I don't expect you to do that unless you want to. But I want to explain the concept because it relates. So the concept of grams per kilogram per day just means that there are known amounts of carbohydrate that is necessary for an active lifestyle, for endurance sports, or if you're totally sedentary, let's say you have been injured or you've just had surgery. I have several friends, one of which just had shoulder surgery. So she's pretty sedentary for a while. And so it's kind of helpful to know like how many carbohydrates do you need to just function without eating too many? Well, the best way to do that is going by using grams per kilogram per day. Okay. The exact same thing is true for protein. If those of you in this group, if you heard Dr. Stu Phillips, who I got to interview last May, he's a huge proponent of calculating macronutrients this way because research has shown that a certain amount of protein is necessary for muscle protein synthesis to occur. If you estimate your protein needs using a grams per kilogram per day, you will know that you are getting enough. If you only calculate percentages of a calorie level that you're just guessing at, you can be way off. Okay. And studies have shown if you use grams of protein or grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight, it is far more accurate than calculating the percentage of calories. So I hope that makes sense. I don't want to make this too confusing. But basically, all that I've read about macrocycling, and I did a fair amount of research on it, what all the trainers are telling people to do is just guess how many calories you need or go to some calculator online and calculate how many calories that you need per day, then take the percentages of that. But that's kind of backwards. So what I do instead is I take a person's body weight, their activity level, whether they're male or female, how old they are, and some other parameters. But one thing I use is body weight, and I calculate their protein and carbohydrate needs based on their body weight. And then there are ranges based on activity level. So for instance, protein recommendations, and these are just a few right here. And these came from Dr. Stu Phillips. So if a person is sedentary, they just need about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Okay, that's the RDA. If you're sedentary, about all that you need, unless you've just had surgery. If you've had surgery, those protein needs go up, and there are different numbers if you've had surgery because you're in a healing phase. Your body's healing from surgery, so you need more protein. If you're moderately active, it's 0.8 to 1. If people who are over the age of 40, as all of us are in this group, those needs, I think I cut off my, my formula there, but for those of us who are over 40, and that would be everybody in this group, because you can't be younger than 40 to get in my group. So that's 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram, and it's higher because of age-related muscle loss. And that's something I talked about in a previous food and fitness session. But basically, as we get older, we lose muscle mass unless we do strength training and consume enough protein. So our protein needs go up. Our protein needs, when we're over 40, are higher on a gram per kilogram basis than they are when we're in our 20s if we're sedentary, which is kind of interesting if you think about that. Endurance athletes can need up to 1.6. Bodybuilders can go up to 2 grams per kilogram, 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So these are the numbers, and I have a whole sheet of these formulas. I might have even put them in the handout section, which is under files. So if you look up there, I'll check later. But anyway, this is what dietitians do. We have all these numbers, these formulas that we use to calculate your protein and macro needs. And then if you want to know the calories, then you take each one of those times, well, protein times 4, carbohydrate times 4, fat. There is no known formula for calculating fat needs. But what most dietitians use is 1 to 2 grams per kilogram of fat, 1 to 2 grams of fat per kilogram of body weight per day. Okay. So I don't want to get too complicated here, but carbohydrate has similar gram per kilogram per day recommendations. Sedentary, it's pretty low, 2 to 4, really 2 to 3 if you're sedentary. Moderately active is 4 to 5 grams of carb per kilogram per day. Endurance athletes, 5 to 7, unless you're training for one of those silly Ironman races, which I can't understand why anybody would ever want to do that. Or like some of the Tour de France cyclists, they're going to need upwards of 10 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram per day. So all of this to say that the macro cycling plan, the way they have it set up, is really not done well, because it does not ensure that you get enough carbohydrate, number one. The protein recommendation is way too high. And the problem with too high of a protein recommendation, like if I told you you had to consume 150 to 200 grams of protein per day, I'd like to see you try that. I challenge you to do that. You could probably do it a couple days. I doubt if you could do that every day. It's a ton of protein. And one problem with eating too much protein is then it displaces the carbohydrate, and which some people think, well, great, we don't need carbs anyway. Well, if you think about fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, those are all carbohydrate, and they are full of nutrition, of phytochemicals and polyphenols and antioxidants and all these things that help fight cancer, help prevent diabetes, heart disease, dementia. All of those things are pretty much in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. And that's my biggest problem with low carb diets, is that your intake of all those good things is not very high. It's not great. So if we do the math with the method I am talking about, the same woman, 55 years old, 68 kilograms, and I used 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram per day of protein. That came out to be 82 to 95 grams of protein per day, which is a very, very attainable amount of protein. It's probably a little higher than what most women eat. So it is true that a lot of women need to eat more protein, but it's not 200 grams a day. So I hope you can see what I'm saying. Using the carbohydrate formula that I just talked about, it's came out to be 272 to 300 grams of carbs which is not that high. I mean, if you've been on a keto diet, you probably think that's way too high, but it's actually a very normal amount of carbohydrate. You can easily meet all your vitamin and mineral needs with that amount of carbohydrate with fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, things like that. And then 68 to 100 grams of fat. That's a very reasonable amount of fat. Okay. If and I'm not a big believer, I'm not a believer at all in dieting, but if a woman wanted to try to lose weight, probably the better way to go about it is to keep the protein the same there, which is still a decent amount. Maybe reduce the carbs just a little bit, go on the lower end of the fat range, but increase exercise. So that way you're creating a calorie deficit without eating some kind of wacky macronutrient um, pattern. So I hope that makes sense. I think doing it this way, you are assured of getting the amount of protein that you need without getting too much. And you have plenty of carbohydrates without getting too much of those either. So it's a very reasonable way of eating, and it's also a very sustainable way versus the macro cycling, which is really, in my opinion, is not sustainable for a long time. Okay. So the pros of macro cycling is if you like a structured plan with 2 week on, 2 week off, high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, but it's always high protein, give it a try. I do think that 40% of protein would be very hard to maintain. So I was reading the article by the trainer that I mentioned earlier, and I just decided to copy his quote. I mean, I put it in quotes. I just want to tell you what he said. He says, basically, you dial in your macros and use those macros and calories all week, which to me doesn't make any sense. He said there's no cycling. Well, there actually is every 2 weeks. No making different meals day to day and matching your workouts or cycling your calories up and down, whether or not you worked out. I guess that's true. But if you're not working out and you are eating the high protein, high fat way, you can easily take in a boatload of extra calories that way. He says you stick with one macro breakdown for 2 weeks and then switch every 2 weeks between 3 ratio breakdowns. So his point being that, when you switch every 2 weeks, during one 2 week period, you get a lot of carbs and very little fat. And during the other one, you get a lot of fat and very little carbs, but the protein stays the same at that really high amount. I think that's confusing. Personally, it's not something I would really want to follow. And I think I have a slide on the cons. Okay, so I think you might be able to see you're counting macronutrients every day, all the time. Some people are fine with that. Some people do that and they're okay with that. I think I don't know, it takes the pleasure away from food. It produces guilt if you don't hit your macro ranges. Also, the one point I haven't mentioned yet is I don't think it's any more effective at weight loss than just simply eating less. I think you should, watch the protein for sure, but simply eating less total calories and or expending more calories. Put the focus on being active and strength training. That's what I think. The other con of macrocycling is the existing plan, at least the one that I found on the internet, and I saw it several places, is extremely high in protein, way too high, and that means it's going to be harder to sustain, and you're likely to miss out on some key nutrients because you're not consuming the carbohydrates that have those key nutrients. So, all of that to say, it is a plan that's out there. You'll probably hear about it. If you're really into numbers and keeping track of things, you might really like it. I'd love to know if you try it and how it goes for you. It's not something I would do personally, and it's not something that I would recommend. I think there could be a modified version of that, where the protein is lower, and then maybe could go that way, but it's still kind of this whole thing of high carb, high fat, low carb, low fat. I don't know. I'd probably get confused which week I'm on. And I'd rather see women just eat a healthy diet, focusing on, I don't know, here, let me see. I don't know if you can see me. There. Focusing on getting the foods that you enjoy in your diet, eating more fruits and vegetables because most people don't eat enough, myself included, and paying attention to hunger and fullness and satisfaction. But the other half of the equation, as you know, is exercise and strength training and focusing on those things. So all of this to say, I'm not a huge fan of my macrocycling. So I hope this has been helpful. Please feel free to ask any questions. You can always watch this again because it'll be in the guide section. So if it was confusing, let me know. It's hard to explain some of the concepts there. But if you have questions, feel free to ask, in the group anytime. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate those of you who do show up. We don't get big numbers in this weekly session, but I still enjoy doing it, and I hope it's helpful for you. So, all right. I'll see you next week. No, actually, I won't see you next week. Next week, I will be in Alaska for the Alaska Ironman. So I will not be having a Food and Fitness Live next week, but I will the week after that. So hope you guys are doing great. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.